This is a special press briefing called by a coalition of over 70 civil society organizations which make up the Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room to express their displeasure over the non-assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill by President Buhari, despite the reworking by the National Assembly.
I know members of the press may have one or two questions.
INEC is empowered by law to release the notice for general elections at least a year before its conduct. However, members of civil society organizations are apprehensive that February 22nd, 2022 will make it exactly a year to the 2023 general elections, and without a proper law to govern its conduct, the elections might be in jeopardy.
Of the Electoral Bill 2022 requires INEC to issue notice of election not later than 360 days before the day appointed for an election. As indicated by INEC, the scheduled date for the 2023 presidential election and National Assembly election is February 18, 2023. However, if the President acts on the bill after the 22nd February 2022, the date for the 2023 election and other subsequent elections, all the activities might be affected.
The group is also exploring other ways to compel the president, like staging a protest if the president fails to assent to the bill.
The next step for us within the remit of what we can do as civil society will be to, of course, explore the possibility of protests and also the lobbying that you talked about.
While applauding the National Assembly for correcting the issues of drafting errors and cross-referencing raised by civil society organizations, the group says there is a correction which is more about its interpretation.
We're happy to report that 98% of all the drafting errors and the cross-referencing gaps have been resolved based on the transmitted version of the bill that we have reviewed. There's just one clause in particular that is yet to be resolved, but that again is also a subject of interpretation.
The group insists that it will continue to lobby and urge President Buhari to sign the bill without further delay.
Well, that's basically what we're talking about this morning. This week, the civil society organizations, which you see there, are now saying that they're going to start what they term a week of action because they say that delay in signing the Electoral Act could jeopardize what could come up in 2023. The question is, how is that going to happen? We have with us this morning Mr. Austin Aigbe, who is a Senior Program Officer, Center for Democracy and Development. We also have joining us via Zoom Dr. Sam Amadi, who is a Director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. And in Lagos, we have Professor Paul Ananaba, who's a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Gentlemen, welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Welcome.
Let me start quickly with you, Mr. Aigbe. I'm sure that your CSO was a part of the coalition of CSOs which spoke on Friday on the president's delay in signing the Electoral Act. Why are you so worried about this?
For many reasons. We've got to the point that it's almost a certain that President Buhari just don't want to sign the electoral bill. If he declined this time, it will be the 6th time since becoming president of Nigeria. We are worried because the antecedent is clear that President Buhari maybe doesn't like an improvement in the electoral architecture. With the complaint made, all the refusal to assent last year, and all the issues he raised had been addressed.
Why do you think that the president doesn't want to sign? I mean, he has 30 days from when it is transmitted to him, doesn't he?
You're right. I mean, 2018, he had that 30 days, and there was this back and forth until December of 2018, when he said, well, we are too close to election. I mean, based on ECOWAS protocol, we cannot go ahead to use a new bill, a new act to run an election. And the election was February of 2019. So what the president was to hide under the ECOWAS protocol. Last year, you also know that in spite of the enormous resources that went into designing that bill, the president came back after 31 days. After 31 days. It was on this station I said that the last day, which was 30 days, fell on a Sunday. He still got one more day, which is a Monday. And that Monday was when he responded that, well, I won't go ahead to sign because of these issues. And thankfully, there was a lot of permutation that the National Assembly should just override and move on. However, the National Assembly, based on maybe wisdom, they reversed themselves and said, well, we are ready to go ahead with the president. We need to correct all of the things that the president said, that the direct primaries was too expensive based on security challenge in the country. Giving political party one option of selecting a candidate was an uphill task. There was need to include indirect primaries and, of course, consensus provision. And it was on your interview at the beginning of the year that the president, and he was specifically asked, will you sign when those corrections are made? And the president said, yes, I will sign when there is indirect, when there is consensus. Now we have those provisions in the bill. So why is the president taking more than 5 days to sign? I mean, it's this curiosity that is bringing all of this to the table.
Let me ask Dr. Samamadi, do you also share this anxiety of the president delaying in signing the Electoral Act?
Because usually, presidents don't veto bills that they have serious issues. So the point is that the president, maybe one can argue with some particular that it's not a fan, or he thinks probably the electoral acts are okay, and therefore some of these improvements are not necessarily what he wants. But clearly, the president sign off on the bills with ceremony once they land on the table. And usually, also because presidential veto comes clear. Everybody knows exactly that the president will not sign this bill. The president had communicated when the bill was being deliberated that he was not going to sign the bill. So that's the process of veto. It's principle, and it's usually around ideology. So if the president has not signed any of these bills for the last 3 or 4 times, and again, some of the legislators were wisely too, use these bills as a ping-pong for personal interest. For example, why bring a provision around disqualification of persons who are appointees? Does the work of an appointee override the work of a president? So if there's somebody who's an incumbent in governor current election, why should you disqualify an appointee from partaking in primary, etc.? So those foolish actions that are self-serving now fits into perhaps a president who is not a fan. Let's be fair, charitable. Maybe he would have signed off if there were no such complications. But the National Assembly continues to make laws with so much self-interest and make them as if they are making meat pie. They keep cutting and adding whenever they like. It should have been principled debate, and once the president returned to them, they should have just removed the direct primary and sign off on the bill. Now, they started complications, but primarily, evidence shows that this president is not a fan. Don't forget that Ananaba came and established a committee. Usually, electoral reforms are president executive bill. So the president should have been the one in the last 2 tenures, should have been the one who shepherds the bills in the National Assembly, who puts his presidential power behind it, and drive everybody to sign it up, because that ought to have been a presidential project. Now it's coming from civil society and legislators and INEC especially, and the president has been picking, picking faults here and there. So maybe he still has a few days. Probably he could sign off because of other important provisions. The consensus is critical to the president of the APC. So we have not yet lost full hope. Politics might still save this bill. Who knows?
Okay, let's ask Professor Ananaba whether the president is in a bind here, because Dr. Madi says that the lawmakers keep tampering with the bill like they're making meat pie. I don't know that meat pie likes to be tampered with, but let's hear the thoughts of Professor Ananaba on this.
Well, it's a matter that will give every Nigerian some concern. The power of the masses is in their votes, and those votes are exercised in properly conducted elections. It's only if one is not part of this country that you will not get some concern if at this stage we are not certain as to which law, which regulatory framework will govern the elections. And that is why in the previous elections you have huge election petitions that take so much money, takes time, leads even violence, because the Electoral Act ought to have been in place by now. I'm not here to talk about who should be blamed, but I know that whoever ought to be blamed already knows. So it's not my business to say who should be blamed, but Nigerians should be able to find out. Doing table tennis with National Assembly, the executive and all that, that is not what I think Nigerians need to do today or need to see. I also appreciate that the National Assembly did not go head on when there was a refusal to sign or to assent to the bill. The National Assembly backtracked and, effected amendment. Even if there were clauses that became objectionable after that backtracking, that first backtracking shows that there is a willingness to deal and move forward. I would have expected that the executive team and the legislative team should hold a few days retreat on this bill and then get it signed. Now, what we are doing is gradually heating up the polity. Now, it's, the civil society is going to hold rally. It's going to cost money, it's going to cost time, and we don't know. The rally may become violent, for example, and you're going to become destructive. It's in a situation where there is fuel crisis. There's a situation where airlines are saying we're going to increase, and you cannot go easily on the roads today. Cooking gas, food, and all that. So Nigerians vote and partake in governance on their own part by the social contract, expecting that those that have voted will be patriotic, will want to do things that will affect the masses.
Are you saying, my apologies, Prof, are you saying by any chance that the protest being proposed by a coalition of civil society organizations may not achieve any desired...
No, I mean, it's not new. It's not new. The civil societies will only protest.
So you don't see any bite to the protest? How
much bite has come from even NLC strikes and all the strikes up and all everywhere? As we speak, it's on 1 month one strike. What has happened? So this is the trajectory we are coming from. And let's not theorize most of these things. Yes, there will be protests, and after that, what? In my place, my village, we were taught as children that it is the oath taken by the debtor that is more important. It is the oath of the debtor.
In this case, who is
in
the
English
debtor?
language, you will not get the meaning. You get it completely. It is when the debtor says, I will pay on son. So that is one that's important. Not the creditor.
So I imagine from that analogy, Prof, the president is the one owing Nigerians assents to this bill. Am I right?
It is the president. If the president says, yes, I will sign, will the problem not be over?
Okay. But he already said he would sign.
What version did he say he would sign?
No, but you heard in our interview earlier this year, which was also referenced by the City Demand, that the president said if those changes are effected, he would sign.
The point is the way we manage even information and all that. Up till now, we should have an insight whether the president will sign or not. We don't have that insight. We're only expecting that the 30 days of Section 58 is running out, and we're not hearing anything.
Some have spoken about the body language of the Attorney General. He had an interview on our sister program, Politics Today, and I've heard people say his body language appears as though he will advise the president against signing it. So there's that body language, but that's the best we have. Do you think that not hearing anything means that maybe the president is taking Nigerians for granted on this?
I don't think so. I think that a lot of things happen in governance, but I think that this anxiety is not necessary. I mean, put everybody holding their breath, looking at the electoral bill. I mean, 360 days, and you must give notice and all that. Going to restructure the timings for the elections now will also affect so much. That's what I was trying to say. And that is why many times, remember that election petitions must be within 180 days. A lot of things about election are streamlined.
They have time frames.
They have time frames. So if you begin to tinker with the timing, a lot more problems that may not have been intended, unintended, and intended will now begin to show up. We shouldn't at this time as a country be vacillating. By now, the laws should be very clear. Remember, INEC will also roll out guidelines.
So all of that is being delayed as a result of this.
Exactly, and that's why you see sometimes INEC is saying, we are going to be in trouble. Simply, that's my understanding.
Okay.
If this bill is not signed into law immediately.
Okay, well, Dr. Madi, are you as concerned about the timeline as well as Professor Ananaba is, concerning this? Of course, it's one of the premises upon which the civil society organizations are also speaking. The timeline is important if we're to get the elections running as and when due. Do you think this concern is understood by those people who are part of the process of helping the president sign this bill?
Actually, legal provisions, they are not clear. So it gives anxiety concerning, how the electoral management body will behave. But again, let me make it very clear. I think that INEC has the law to guide it now. As a matter of fact, the too much investment in the new Electoral Act arises from, in my view, a misunderstanding about administrative law principles. For example, most of the notable improvement INEC has brought, beavers, use of technology, and so on and so forth, are things that INEC, as today, has the legal competence to do. I've argued long ago, in 2019, that INEC is primarily a regulatory agency that has the power of rulemaking, and that INEC has got enough authorization in the Constitution to roll out these changes and these innovations that will help election. And even the 2010 Electoral Act, that's the one that's still operative, as amended, still provides enough cover. So what has happened over the years has been two things have happened. One, there has been a gross misunderstanding by senior lawyers, and have also deceived the courts to think that INEC is merely a transactional agency. INEC just runs logistics, provide election. But INEC is primarily a regulator, and that's its first job is to rulemaking. So the Constitution says INEC should conduct election free and fair. That's the democratic theory of election. So INEC has the power, therefore, to put together everything, roll out rules through due process, notice and comments, put that in the register. We're going to make this rule. And the people make comments, INEC conducts public hearing, and INEC establish those rules. Those rules are as valid as if made by the National Assembly. So this too much faith or hope on a new electoral law, I don't share those premises. I think that INEC has constituted if it works its rulemaking process well, if it develops a business rule that allows everybody to participate, and therefore it goes to a due process and establish these guidelines on beavers, on electronic transmission, and any other innovation it considers reasonable. No Supreme Court properly guided all over the world. The rules are very established that the courts must defer to a regulatory agency in rolling out and executing those functions as long as they act legally. And thankfully, nothing in the Constitution or the Electoral Act today disables INEC from expressly taking decisions. So
Dr. Mahdi, your submissions, pardon me, your submissions would imply then that the National Assembly, the whole National Assembly, actually used taxpayers' money to embark on a futile exercise to amend this Electoral Act and get a clean one that empowers electronic transmission of results, rejection of results declared under duress and the rest. So, I mean, that's the implication. But let me just quickly take this to Mr. Igbe to respond to that. So, Mr. Igbe, I mean, from Dr. Mahdi's submissions, it would sound as though INEC really has all it needs now. So, do you agree that this whole process was futile, trying to get an Electoral Act amendment bill to guide future elections in Nigeria?
Yeah, that was a very fantastic question you asked. I beg to a bit distance from my very senior Oga, Dr. Sam Amadi. The fact of the matter is that we've had precedents that INEC have been innovative. The innovation within the INEC is not new. As a participant in the electoral process, we know that INEC has come up with a lot of innovation that has improved on the electoral process. But here we are face to face with Supreme Court judgment that eventually nullify those innovations. For example, in 2016 elections in Edo State, where there were a lot of issues that pertaining to smart card figures, I mean, accreditation of voters using a smart card. Whereas on the register of voters, you have more voters. On the smart card reader, you have less of those voters. And that case went from the tribunal up to Supreme Court. For participants in that process, we know that the Supreme Court nullified that the smart card reader was not known to law. And meanwhile, it's an improvement. If you also know, when Professor Jega appeared before the National Assembly to talk about the smart card reader, he was emphatic because the National Assembly wanted to kill the smart card reader innovation. Professor Jega said the whole idea of smart card reader was not to take away the voter register because that is the grand norm provided for in our laws. The innovations in INEC are super exciting, they are good, but they need some level of backing. And as one who has followed this process, if you look at 2019 election, INEC talked about server. Were we not in this country? When INEC talked about transmission of results from polling units, and that was going to converge in one server. But the Supreme Court nullified that process. And in fact, INEC is right now trying to organize its own processes with the introduction of the IRF, the result viewing portal of INEC, that all polling unit results from EC8A are transmitted electronically, are pasted, where participants, citizens, voters can go on that portal and download their polling unit to verify. We are not still where we want to get to. If you then do from EC8A, INEC up to this moment has not come up with a provision to upload from EC8B, from EC8C, from EC8D. We need to be able to upload the collation of results at the world level. We need to upload the one at the local government level. We need to upload the one at the state level, so we can follow up the trajectory and then say, wow, this process is transparent. But we need the law. We need this law to back this innovation. If this law is not passed, I mean, my brother Samamadi talked about what I wanted to just quickly speak to about appointees of government. Let's be fair. As a participant, when you are a governor or a president, you have ministers and commissioners. They become automatic delegates in a primary election, particularly in indirect primaries. What it means, if I am to contest with you you already have a lot of vote ahead of you, then it makes me incapacitated. There is no fair play. If we must clean up our political environment, we must create a fair, transparent, and credible process that makes sure that the place is fair enough to compete. That it was the wisdom that National Assembly came up with with the direct primaries mandatorily. But again, people say no, this will not help. And then now we have gone back. I mean, just also quickly put, it was the Senate leader. It was the Senate leader that represented the bill that we're now talking about, which presupposed that for every executive bill coming to Senate comes through the Senate leader. I want to assume that it was the president or the Minister of Justice who would have had a conversation with the Senate leader to make those provision, to make that submission. Otherwise, I will be curious that it's taking the president too much of time. President Buhari need to just sign this in 2015 January. President Buhari at Transcorp Hilton, while we're signing the peace deal, President Buhari criticized former President Goodluck Jonathan for not signing the electoral bill. That he quoted that before 2023 there was a bill, before 2007 there was a bill, before 2011 there was a bill, that there was no bill before 2015. And now we are talking about 2023. There was no bill in 2019. There is no bill in 2023. And President Buhari is now sitting on that seat that he once criticized. He should sign the bill, and let's move with a new regime that will improve our landscape.
Well, I mean, interesting argument you put forward, Mr. Igbe, but we need to go on a break now. This is the 6th time that this amendment will be before President Buhari. He has given his word that he will sign it, but there will be questions as to what happens if the president reneges on his promise. We'll go on this break and come back to take a look at other dimensions of this. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The National Assembly transmitted the re-amended bill to the President on January the 31st. Today being February the 21st means that 21 days have gone. We have 9 more days to go for President Buhari to assent to this bill or otherwise. So let's continue our conversation. We still have with us Professor Paul Ananaba, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, right here in our Lagos studio, as well as Dr. Sam Amadi, the Director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, joining us via Zoom, and Mr. Austin Igbe, the Senior Program Officer of CDD. But let me come to Professor Paul Ananaba. You've said earlier that, I mean, we've seen protests in the past from civil society, labor, and this has not achieved much. That would raise questions about maybe government's attitude to clamors, from the citizenry. But it would look like, on this case, there's an overwhelming desire to have this passed into law. And this has been a long time coming, 2015. Is this a case of the president knowing what is best for Nigerians, or Nigerians knowing what is best for them?
Well, it's not a question of yes and no. There may be information available to the president where we may not be disposed to. And there's also the citizens' right to insist on what they want. But that happens where both sides are playing their roles patriotically. Some, there are incidents of leadership. There are security reports and all that the president sees. But that's why a leader must have confidence and trust. Must be somebody that the followers or the led will believe at every point. And that's why you see when there is failure of that psychological content, there is then no leadership. Having said that, it is good to protest. It is good to speak out. It is good to make views known. Because sometimes the president may not also know exactly what the citizens feel, except they speak. He's not a magician. In the context of what we're talking about, the Electoral Act is far too serious than any other thing. And I do not agree that INEC has all the powers to do all that it ought to do. Mr. Igbe was on point, and that's clear. I think he's saying that it is senior lawyers and all that. is not acceptable to me. I am a practitioner of what we are discussing. Innovation without legal framework is a wasted exercise. A lot of funds, a lot of lives, a lot of time will go into waste of time. Because as we speak, the card reader is innovative, as the Sprinkle said, but what are you going to do with it? So it's important that we don't continue with this hazy and uncertain legal framework. Check from 2001 till now. We have been going through the same exercise. So people now have to rush to the court to get interpretation at each point. I don't know whether you have an idea of how many election petitions that go on in this country. Why should it be?
Well, INEC is empowered, pardon me, to make regulations, guidelines for elections. So, where does that fall? Because that also has its own bearing on elections.
Those guidelines are subsidiary legislation. They don't override substantive laws. For example, we were talking about the electronics content. The Electoral Act doesn't cover them, just like the card reader. You make the regulation, yes, go with your regulation, but will it determine the election? So the point being made is simple, that why are we running away from having a clear, I'm not even in support of 2010 Electoral Act as amended. What are we amending? Let us have a clear Electoral Act.
Okay. Well, Dr. Mahdi, I suspect you may want to respond to what Professor Ananaba has just spoken now, and also speak to the challenge of the timeline that the law, makes very clear. There are those who are saying, of course, naturally, the law is very clear. The number of days that INEC has to come up with guidelines, the number of days, which according to, of course, the law, we all know that it has to be done as quickly as possible. If the timeline that INEC set for February 18 or thereabout next year is to hold any water, and the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, the President still has until 2nd of March, beg your pardon, to sign. So those timelines are not very friendly to each other. CSOs are saying sign by 22nd or thereabout, or else, the timelines are going to be endangered. So speak to all of these issues, and what should we really be looking at? What are the options before Nigerians?
I didn't say the new act is useless. I would say INEC does have powers to do those innovations that the CDC said. Yes, that's what I'm saying. INEC can be innovative. Those innovations are legally backed up. And let me respond to Ananaba. Clearly, I think many Nigerian lawyers and some judges really need to update on administrative law. Subsidiary and principal enactment, if they conflict, the point is the Constitution has given INEC this power, the Electoral Act has given the power. Now, the case of the Supreme Court and the card reader is that the Supreme Court says that this technological innovation will not conflict with the fact that the law says that the basis of accreditation is a manual that the smart card reader will not override the register. So the point is that that decision does not say that INEC has no power to do innovation. It's that those innovations will not detract from the express provision of the law. And the point I'm making is very simple. The whole thing INEC has done, the technology around it, derived from their power to regulate conduct of election. So the same powers that INEC had to issue manuals, the same power it has to issue this innovation as part of the free and fair election. So three things flow from this. INEC should step up. By the way, the Supreme Court, the CBN every day issues directives on management of the financial market.
Just to be clear, Dr. Mahdi, just 1 second, Dr. Mahdi, yes. Just to be clear, are you saying that whether the president signs this new bill into law or not, INEC has all the powers that it needs to get the job done?
Exactly. I would say that whether the president signs it or not, The powers in the Constitution and the Electoral Act as it exists today enables INEC to carry out those innovations it has carried. I would like to have a debate. And by the way, Supreme Court is also a learning court. The problem with our lawyers is that they don't improve jurisprudence. If you look at the US Supreme Court, they have moved several changes depending on the theory of democracy and the law. The whole aspect of election is to enable free and fair. And free and fair is a concept around that you can unpack what makes it free and fair. So my argument is that if the INEC follows the way regulators follow, by very detailed procedure of rulemaking, and show explicitly how those rules derive from the enactment that the National Assembly has already empowered it and the Constitution has empowered it. By the way, the Constitution says that only INEC is exempted from legislative or presidential override when it makes regulations for election.
Okay,
so,
well, let's deal with that part that you said, you know, concerns those who practice the law, the lawyers in the House. So, Prof, you want to speak to some of the issues that he's put?
Professor Amadi is also a colleague.
Okay.
I hope you know he is also a colleague. I think that the point being made, which I think is being glossed over, is that this often criticism of critics come on legal practitioners and the courts may not be fair. We're talking about Section 49 of the Electoral Act. That's what the Supreme Court was dealing with. We practice that. The point being made, which he agrees with, is that I don't know why the divergence is that you can do Falek and INEC. You can do manual policy and all that, but it will not override substantive legislation. What we are dealing with here is the substantive legislation, which is the Electoral Act. That's what we're talking about.
Well, his point here is
his point
just asking
is that you can now go into free, fair, and credible election, and it will now based on that you can do so many other things. But that point being said, from my point, is that there is no judicial discretion outside the law. Otherwise, the law will become as be measured by the feet of the judge.
The point he is making is the law that we have, the Constitution and the existing law that we have, is sufficient for INEC to take all of the initiatives that
it is not correct. If it is correct, then there is no need for any amendment. We shouldn't have been discussing about any bill. It means that INEC can come up, do everything it can. No. I concede a point that there are certain things INEC can do now within the available legislation. But they are not enough, which is why you see the National Assembly and the entire country, and the president even saying, no, I won't sign this because of this or that, or I will sign. Now, for example, are you trying to say that electronic voting transmission and all that INEC can within that regime throw that in when Section 49 of the Extant Electoral Act is still alive? So let's limit this discussion to what is helpful to the country. Because if INEC brings up all those good manuals, all the good initiatives, and they are not thoroughly backed by law, they will be struck down by the courts.
Okay.
Now, just one point. The point being made is, let us not distract from the point that efforts have been made to bring up an electoral bill. What is stopping us from having that electoral bill into law now? So that INEC can with certainty move on and not move based on INEC's interpretation of what is free and fair.
Okay. Well, Mr. Igwe, there's one of the points that, and I'm sure you want to speak to some other issues, but it's a point that Professor Ananaba made here the other time, that we've had agitations, we've had advocacy and all of those things, and how much have they really done? Protests. How much have they really been able to, how significantly have they been able to impact on getting anything done. So the national day of protest that is being called tomorrow, to what end do you see this making any impact on the president signing the bill in record time?
I think the president should do the needful quickly to avoid the National Day tomorrow. It's important. Let's avoid it. Let's not create an environment that will lead to what is unintended. The protest being proposed is a peaceful one. It's an advocacy protest. It is not a violent protest. It is a strategic intervention to just call the president to say, please sign this bill, if we need to use the word please. You will also recall when the Not Young to Run advocacy was ongoing, it was more of a road show, a road advocacy or protest advocacy that led to that ascent. It's important that the president does sign this bill for many reasons. One, of course, is that your colleague talked about declaration of result under duress. INEC tried to stop that in 2019. They did. They made every effort. They suspended the declaration of that result, and the fellow concerned went to court, and the court said, INEC got no power. INEC got no power. Now the power is not in the act. That INEC got the administrative procedure to look at results being declared under duress and then interrogate it and probably go back to Form ACHA result, the polling unit result, and recount, and then announce and make a formal declaration. These are innovation. There are many of those. If President Buhari think otherwise with this new provision, we are saying that there is no problem with having those views. Sign the assent to this bill, then propose those amendments and return it back to the National Assembly. We have had that precedent too.
What I'm still not clear on is why CSOs believe or doubt that despite the president having committed himself with his own words in an interview that everyone remembers conducted earlier this year, that he still has no intention of signing the bill. I don't know why CSOs have that.
It's 21 days. It's 21 days. You see, we just got 9 days. 21 days today. I think President Buhari need to shock everyone by assenting today. Let's today, February the 21st, be a national day of honor by assenting to that bill.
Because Dr. Amadi made reference to something. He said something about the National Assembly, touching the bill like as if they're making meat pie. I do not know what is inside the bill, apart from putting the including other options of indirect primaries and including the consensus option and defining it. Were there other additions that the public is not aware of?
I think the public is aware. Dr. Amadi also mentioned that. There seems to be, and I also mentioned that in the course of our conversation, political appointees. You go to some state, no election at the local government level, then there are caretaker committees and chair of those local authorities, and if those chairs exist, the party constitution, majority of the party constitution, allows that chair of local government, political appointees, commissioners, even some senior special advisors are automatic delegates. What this means is that for every ad hoc delegate, you go to the primary election and you select those ad hoc delegates, maybe 1,000 of them. And within that ad hoc delegate, that's where you see the problem of usually when the malfeasance we see with indirect primaries. So you now see the governor or the president having a huge trunk of automatic delegates who have other interests. So one automatic delegate, maybe a super commissioner or a super minister, is able to get 10 of those ad hoc delegates. It adds up to that number of automatic delegates. So it gives an unfair chance to one individual. What this law is saying, that will be no need for those appointees. So they are still... And if you must go ahead, if you need to contest election as a political appointee, you must resign ahead of time. And that is a normal. It gives fair chance for everybody. So
what Dr. Amadi was saying about this law being self-serving as well is not exactly incorrect.
No, I think it is our views. The truth of the matter is that what Dr. Amadi is saying is that on this spectrum of the argument, those political appointees needed to also partake in this process, so they have a fair chance. So the truth of the matter is there is the war invisible hand of demand and supply within these political actors, one on the executive side and the other on the legislative side. And don't forget, the baton is about to change in 2023. There are certain individuals in National Assembly who may want to become the executive members, and there are people, of course, it's almost becoming a national conversation that the retirement house for governors is the National Assembly. So there seems to be that some governors may be eyeing some seats of National Assembly members, and these guys are saying you got too much advantage. If I must play the role, if I must contest with you at the party primaries, I need a fair advantage. I need a fair ground to do that competition. And for the way the law exists at this material time, I don't have that fair chance. So these guys, knowing that we are not going to use direct primaries, okay, fine. They've gone in. I mean, speaking about National Assembly members now, fair enough. I agree with Dr. Amadi that they are playing their own game, yes, but the executive is also playing their game. So each of them are playing game. But what matter if let's go out of this narrative and then look at a fair game narrative. I was involved with student unionism. If you have an unfair chance, you'll never win an election. If the VC support a candidate, it's an uphill task for you as a civil rights activist within the school environment. The same thing goes within the political system. I have worked closely with political party. I know to some degree the nuances of enrichment, where a few people gather in one small room to appoint those who go for party primaries, to make consensus candidates, to say you are going, and I've said in this platform before that even the consensus provision give unfair chance to women political participation. Most of the time, the women are just screened out because consensus never waits for them.
Well, Dr. Amadi too is no stranger to the political process. He's tried to throw his hat in the ring a few times. Dr. Amadi, let me ask you what jeopardy this non-passage of this Electoral Act puts our democracy in. I interviewed a gentleman over the weekend, sometime on Friday, and he was talking about how coups have become quite fashionable in some of our West African neighboring countries, and that Nigeria needs to show an example. Does the non-signage of this Electoral Act put our democracy in jeopardy?
To focus on democracy in jeopardy, the way INEC is packed with political operatives. We see the retirement of very clear-headed persons like Iban or Mike Guinea. So I'm more worried about who is staffing INEC than actually the Electoral Act referring to. Professor Ananaba mentioned Section 49. Section 49 has nothing to do with the technology. Simply says you must follow the voter register. Oftentimes, we lawyers create obstacles for regulatory agencies and the court. Let me make it very clear. INEC, this new Electoral Act will be nice because it brings in some of the convention. I worked on the disability part of it, so we have mainstreamed the Disability Act into it to give backing to what INEC has already been doing. But I argue that what INEC has been doing in providing level field for voters who live with disability is something that can be justified by existing law and constitution. So basically, my argument is, if the president doesn't sign this bill, and the last time, INEC should start now rolling out the guideline for the election. INEC has the power to do that, and I should that. But on a more important point about the fragility of democracy, we have seen it across West Africa. In fact, we have seen democracy regression that is now a topic of discussion in international politics, whether democracy is relapsing. So the fact that we don't have clarity on electoral law, the fact that INEC itself is almost like in a law, not knowing where to go, the fact that the ruling party in this country is playing ping-pong with a convention, the fact that even the opposition party itself is struggling, the fact that the INEC, the electoral management body, is now housing persons that people are disputing their objectivity and non-partisanship, where there's some kind of adverse selection, removing those who have shown integrity by prosecuting criminals, those who have stood strong, those who understand the knowledge about election. These things are worrisome because Nigeria is not exempted from the free fall happening around it. Democracy is always fragile. And one of the things about democracy is that you move from arrangement to practice to institution. We have not yet institutionalized democracy yet because that requires repeated process of dealing. We've got under Jonathan, we are lucky to have what we now call consolidation. But that consolidation is false. The value system, the sense of political partisanship, the lack of balance in the polity, even poverty itself. Research by political science have shown that level of poverty, inequality speaks more around how democracy fails. So with Nigeria at a high level of poverty and massive inequality, and with the desperation of people in office, and with the lack of independence of counter-legislative institutions like the courts, like the regulatory agencies, the fact that they are easily compromised, the fact that most of them don't even understand the laws and the knowledge guiding their area of operation. This raised concern. I'm more worried about these factors than the president exercising his constitutional right to veto. The point that the National Assembly is self-serving. By the way, why should a National Assembly who wants to be governor, wants to use law to remove his opponent, who is a Minister of Justice or Minister of Transport? Why should you make that bare-knuckle attack, using law selfishly and unwisely? If I was Attorney General, basically, I would advise the president not to sign a law that says, look, the advantage that democracy gives you, even the US, presidents, we have super delegates. The political play is not what should regulate with elections. The rules are very clear. If somebody has delegates because he's in power and he has commission who are delegates, go and do politics. Stop using lawmaking to remove politics from its character. It's about persuasion. It's about mobilizing people. It's about fair advantage. It's the way you have money, you can finance radio talks and television and adverts. Someone doesn't have money. Should we use law to go and dissent to reorganize all forms of advantage that are not necessarily illegal, that are not necessarily against the law? So I blame the National Assembly for whatever happens to this bill. If they have just overridden the president or just removed that provision without doing this selfish game, we won't be here. But nevertheless, my word is INEC should rise to the game. INEC is authorized. All the innovations they have made so far derive from the Constitution and the Electoral Act. So whether the president signs or not, INEC should go ahead and roll out the guideline for 2023 election.
Okay, Dr. Madi, I'm sure that, our guest here at the studio has, and I'm sure that we can start a whole argument about level playing field and undue advantage and privileges, if we'd like. But let's wrap up this conversation here. I'm going to throw it over to Lagos for Professor Ananaba's last comments. But we've been speaking with Mr. Austin Aigbe, who's a Senior Program Officer, Center for Democracy and Development. Thank you so much for coming on. And Dr. Sam Amadi is the Director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Dr. Madi, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. Over now to the crew in Lagos.
Thank you, Mark. Well, Prof, there is a lot about the law and then the practice of the law. Another angle to this whole conversation are the people who will execute the law. From all of the, clearly we don't seem to have a consensus on whether or not the signing of the bill or not signing of the bill will have any significant impact. But we are less than a year, it would seem, to the general elections, at least by the date that INEC has released already. What do you see happening in the distant future?
I have a feeling that the president will sign the bill because he knows that there's a lot of confidence and trust on him by Nigerians. And there may be some distractions or some concerns he will have. I urge him to find a way to get those issues resolved quickly and have the bill signed. No law on this planet has been perfect. If there are, we have to weigh the weight of those concerns to know whether they should actually stop the signing of the bill. Since the National Assembly had actually shifted and didn't go to override him, they could have done that if they had the will. Let the president sign the bill into law. Other things, we can always amend further again.
Okay.
But I don't want us to begin with protests.
In the event that, just a very, very quick one because we have 30 seconds. In the event that the president doesn't sign as you expect, what happens?
If he doesn't sign, the democratic process kicks in. The protests, even lawsuits and all that.
Can you sue the president for reneging on his promise?
not about promise.
Oh, okay.
It's about the Constitution says the president should sign. If he doesn't sign, the National Assembly, that's what we call mandamus. You can go to court to ask the court to order some public officers to do what they ought to do by law.
After all, former President Goodluck Jonathan amended it in 2015. That's what we're using now. So it's expected that President Buhari will also do similar.
I expect that the president will sign.
Well, I guess it's countdown right now to the day.
I expect it will sign.
And it will seem like there are two countdowns now. Countdown to the limited number of days INEC has to work with, and countdown to Mr. President's 30 days.
Yeah.
Well, Professor Paul Ananaba, Senior Advocate of Nigeria.
INEC should not attempt this wholesome arguments going on. They know that they have limitations.
Absolutely.
And they should work only within the law.
For which reason they themselves have been speaking about that. We've been
Exactly.
listening to officers of INEC say that. Thank you so much for your time
Thank
this
you.
morning. Well, we'll take a short break to take on another issue of a lot more importance, perhaps, or not, after now.